Welcome to Myth or Reality Stories. Is this story a myth or a reality? Find out at the end.
The first time I watched the movie, I was blissfully unaware of the horror that would seep into my soul like a poison. It was a Friday night, and the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world cloaked in an unsettling darkness that seemed to throb with a heartbeat of its own. My friends and I gathered in the living room, popcorn bowls perched on our laps, the flickering light of the TV casting ghostly shadows across our faces. We were young, naive, and utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. "Come on, it's just a movie," Jake said, a cocky grin plastered across his face. He had picked a film, a foreign horror flick that promised twists and turns, blood and gore. The kind of movie that made you feel alive, or so he said. I glanced at the cover art, a grotesque face half hidden in shadow, eyes wide and empty, a smile split across lips that dripped with blood. My stomach twisted, but I shrugged it off. What could go wrong? As the opening credits rolled, a sense of unease settled in like a thick fog. I could hear my heart thumping in my chest, a primal warning that I chose to ignore. The film began with a group of friends, much like us, exploring an abandoned asylum. The camera panned over peeling walls and shattered windows, each frame heavy with the weight of untold stories, the ghosts of those who had suffered, who had screamed, who had died. The air grew thick with tension, and I could feel my friends shifting uncomfortably beside me. "Relax, it's just pretend," Lisa whispered, but as the first scream pierced the silence of the asylum, we all jumped. Jake laughed, a hollow sound that echoed against the walls of the room. "You guys are too easy." But as the film continued, the laughter faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Each gruesome scene left us more on edge than the last. Blood splattered across the screen, bodies contorted in unnatural positions, and some invisible force seemed to reach through the screen, clawing at our sanity. I could feel the bile rising in my throat as a character met a particularly gruesome end, the camera lingering on the sizzling flesh, the gaping wounds. My friends were glued to the screen, but I felt a pull toward the door, a desperate need to escape. Halfway through the movie, the power flickered ominously. The lights danced for a moment before plunging us into darkness. "Great timing, huh?" Jake joked, but his voice trembled slightly. I could hear the others breathing sharply, the tension palpable. The darkness was thick, like a living entity, and I could almost feel it crawling over my skin. "Let's keep watching," Lisa said, her voice barely a whisper. I could hear the fear beneath her bravado, but we huddled closer together, the glow of the TV the only thing connecting us to reality. Then it happened. A loud crash echoed from the direction of the kitchen. We all froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding. "What was that?" I breathed, my voice breaking. "I'll check," Jake said, his bravado evaporating. He stood up, the flickering light casting jagged shadows across his face. As he walked toward the kitchen, a sense of dread washed over me. The film continued to play, but I couldn't focus on the screen anymore. The sound of our breaths filled the silence, punctuated by the occasional creak of the house settling. "Jake," Lisa called out, her voice quivering. Moments stretched into eternity before he returned, his face pale. "It's nothing. Just a cabinet fell over." We all exchanged nervous glances, the air heavy with unspoken fears. The film continued, but it felt different now. The characters on screen were trapped in a nightmare, and we were somehow tethered to their fate. As the tension escalated, I could feel a creeping dread, a certainty that something was terribly wrong. The climax of the film approached with a chilling inevitability. The characters, now isolated and desperate, were being picked off one by one. I clutched my popcorn bowl, knuckles white, while Lisa buried her face in her hands. The screen pulsed with violence, each act of brutality more grotesque than the last. Blood splattered across the walls, and the camera lingered on the dying gasps of the characters, their faces twisted in agony. "Why do we keep watching this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of screams and the sickening squelch of flesh being torn apart. "Because it's just a movie," Jake insisted, but even he seemed less certain now. "Right?" And then it happened. The scene shifted to the asylum's basement, a place thick with shadows and dripping with the stench of decay. The characters stumbled into a room filled with remnants of past horrors, rusted instruments of torture, remnants of lives left behind. The camera focused on a blood-stained chair, and I felt my stomach churn. "Turn it off," I pleaded, my voice rising above the din. "Please." But before anyone could respond, the screen flickered again, and suddenly, we were not alone. A figure stood in the shadows of the basement, watching, waiting. The camera zoomed in, revealing a twisted face, eyes hollow and filled with malice, a smile that promised nothing but pain. The door to the living room slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the air like a gunshot. We all screamed, the sound mingling with the chaos on screen. "What the hell?" Jake shouted, rushing to the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out! Let me out!" Lisa screamed, her voice rising in panic. I felt the walls closing in, the darkness pressing down, suffocating us. The TV blared on, the figure on screen advancing toward the camera, a glint of metal in its hand. In that moment, the line between reality and fiction blurred. My heart raced as the entity on screen mirrored the chaos unfolding in our living room. The laughter, the screams, the blood, it was all too real, too visceral. "Is this some kind of joke?" I yelled, my voice cracking. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then, a loud crash sounded from the kitchen, and we all turned as the figure from the movie seemed to crawl out from the screen. I stumbled backward, eyes wide, as the horror of our situation sank in. It was no longer just a movie. It was here, with us. "Run," Jake shouted, but the door remained locked, the walls closing in around us. The figure's laughter echoed in the room, a sound filled with malice and glee. It was a sound that promised suffering, that promised death. The walls of the living room began to bleed, thick rivulets of crimson oozing from the corners, pulling at our feet. "What the hell is happening?" Lisa cried, her voice laced with terror. The TV flickered again, the image of the figure morphing, its twisted smile stretching impossibly wide. "Get away from me!" I screamed, pushing past Jake, desperate to escape the nightmare that was consuming us. But the walls were closing in, the darkness thickening, suffocating. "Help!" Jake shouted, his voice rising in pitch as the figure advanced, a knife glinting in its hand. I could see the madness in its eyes, a hunger that could not be sated. In a panic, I hurled myself against the door, but it held fast, trapping us in this hellish reality. I could feel the warmth of the blood pulling around my feet, the stench of death filling my nostrils. The walls pulsed, vibrating with the rhythm of our heartbeats, and the figure laughed, a sound that echoed in my mind like a death knell. "Let us out!" I screamed, but the darkness only thickened, wrapping around us like a shroud. The TV blared on, the figure now fully formed, stepping out of the screen and into our reality. Its eyes glowed with a sickening light as it raised the knife, the blade catching the flickering glow of the television. "No! Please!" Lisa cried, her voice breaking, but it was too late. In one swift motion, the figure lunged, the knife plunging into Jake's stomach. He gasped, a look of disbelief etched on his face as blood sprayed across the walls, mingling with the darkness. "Run!" I screamed at Lisa, but she was frozen, horror etched on her face as she watched Jake crumple to the ground. The figure turned its gaze on her, a twisted smile spreading across its face as it advanced. I was paralyzed, watching as the nightmare unfolded before me. The figure brought the knife down again, and blood splattered against the walls, painting a grotesque mural of death. Screams filled the air, a cacophony of terror that echoed inside my head. As the lights flickered and the shadows danced, I realized the truth. The horror wasn't just on the screen, it was here, with us. There was no escape, no way out. Just the darkness swallowing us whole, the laughter of the figure mingling with the sound of our screams. In the end, we were just another story, another flickering image on a screen, lost to the darkness. The last thing I saw was the grin of that twisted figure, a reflection of the horror within us all, as the blood pooled around me, drowning me in a sea of despair. There would be no happy ending, no hope, just the echoing laughter of our demise.
First time watching is a myth and totally made up by us. View the details in the video description. Please subscribe, or else.